Hey, what's going on everyone? Sean from planningfire.com here again. Welcome to the only investment guide you'll ever need, part 2, you can survive on $165,000 a year. Now obviously I chose that title because it's absolutely clickbaity. If so, I hope you stick around because I'd love to give you this information. If you want to read this book with me, the link should be down below. I'll link it to the same book I'm reading, that way you can read along with me. I'd love to hear your feedback. Now, of course, $165,000 a year for almost anyone is going to be a great amount of income. Most people live on less than $50,000 a year in the United States alone. So of course, that being a bit of hyperbole, we still have some great concepts that come out of it. People who live at that bracket or any bracket need to really follow the same rules to avoid having problems with their budget. Now, the steps that are covered in this section of the book are tally your net worth. Make sure you know what you own and what you owe. If you don't know what you own and how much you owe, you'll never be able to balance a budget. So take a list of everything that you own, whether that's houses, cars, collectibles, antiques, anything that has a derived value, put it in one column, and then in the other column, take everything that you owe, whether it's student loans, mortgages, auto insurance, outstanding credit card debt. That goes in the other column. One minus the other, and that's your total net worth. Gives you a great starting. Next, set financial goals for yourself. Even before you think about a budget, understand why you're doing this. For me personally, obviously, it's about the ability to be financially independent, and hopefully with the goal of retiring early down the line. That's why I do what I do, but you have to figure out why you're doing what you do, otherwise you'll have no intrinsic motivation. Number 3, figure out your actual earnings. This number can actually be dramatically different depending on your environment. If you're someone who has a full-time job, steady, stable income, and you're making a salary, you're probably making a certain amount of money every week, 2 weeks, or month. If you have some side hustles, which I highly recommend everyone has, calculate what your average earnings on those are as well. If you're someone who works hourly, figure out what you make every month. If I was budgeting, and I was an hourly employee, I would absolutely skew towards the low side. That'll make it easier to save down the road. And if you're spending more money than you make in a low week, you probably need to reevaluate your spending. Number 4, take a look at your expenses. Just the first pass. Figure out what you owe on average per month. Then, once you have all the big items done, go ahead and go back through and take a look again. Are you spending quite a bit on coffee? Are you spending quite a bit on restaurants? Maybe going out? Other expenses that aren't reoccurring monthly that realistically you need to budget for. Because in reality, you're not going to just stop going out with your friends. That's a terrible way to live. But make sure you budget and plan accordingly, even for these secondary expenses. Number 6, after a month, take that budget back out. Let's see how it worked. You'll be able to take a look at your previous month and realize where you need to tweak. Do I need to add more to the restaurant and going out fund and take away some from the clothing budget? However you want to handle that, reevaluate often. This is not something that's meant to be set in stone. Also, if you find out that you're negative and you're not grossing, if you're not positive a certain amount of cash, time to find a way to make that happen. Number 7, once you have a plan, stick to it. This is easily the hardest part of a budget. It's very easy to get the numbers on paper, but in reality, once you have that budget, making sure you adhere to it is going to be a really big deal. You have to make sure you're dedicated to your budget and that you're sticking to it. Otherwise, this entire exercise is for nothing. And number 8, forgive yourself. Let's be honest, everyone goes over budget. I do frequently. I have a budget, but in reality, if you mess up, that's not the end of the world. It happened, you forgive yourself, you move on. Perhaps it's a learning experience. Do I need to add room in my budget for these expenses? It's just all about that constant feedback loop. But if you do mess up, forgive yourself and move on. It's the only way you're going to be able to tolerate it. Now, this is absolutely something we've talked about on Planning Fire prior, but just as a reminder, so now that you have a surplus in your budget every month, start saving for emergencies. Essentially, having an emergency fund is going to make weathering an emergency substantially easier, and it's also not going to cripple you anywhere near as much financially. Let's say your car dies, for example, and it's going to be $700. If you can't come up with $700, you might put it on a credit card. If that credit card has a high interest rate, 10, 20%, all of a sudden now, instead of just $700, you're paying a lot more for that repair. So have your emergency fund locked and loaded. I recommend 6 months expenses, but to each person it's going to vary based on their circumstance. If you have kids, probably more. If you're a single adult, probably less. But budget for a rainy day. Now also, keep an eye on inflation. So if you make $25,000 a year, I advise that you spend like you make $20,000 a year. So that way you're building in that savings. And also as you grow, adjust. So if you start $25,000, spend like you make $20,000. If all of a sudden you get a promotion and now you're making $50,000, spend like you make $40,000. You're increasing your savings, you're increasing your lifestyle a bit to make you feel good about the promotion, but you're not going above and beyond. It's very easy to get out of control, especially as you start to make more money. The last thing you want to do is rely on making the most amount of money you've ever made. So if you start making from 50 to 100 and you live like you make 100, heaven forbid you lose that job and then you can't find a new one with that same style of living, that's going to be a serious hit to your finances and a serious hit to your lifestyle. So make sure you're always in a place where you can easily replace the income and don't succumb to lifestyle creep. So now you've avoided lifestyle creep, you have your emergency fund, start identifying and paying down debt. In reality, once you free yourself up from that debt, that's just more money you get to put in the win column. If you have any questions about methods to pay down debt, we have other articles here on Planning Fire. I highly recommend you check them out. Different debt method pay downs, but in reality, get yourself out of debt as quickly as you can. Now, that's mostly related to unproductive debt, like student loans, credit cards, auto loans. If you have a mortgage, odds are the interest rate's going to be low enough it won't matter, but just get rid of that high interest debt. Anything over 6%, preferably anything over 4%, I highly recommend trying to tackle as quickly as you can. So the next section we talk about is called Trust No One. And in reality, let's just boil it down. So you're going to get a lot of external influence, whether that's advertising on TV, on the radio, legacy bad examples, a great one being just put your money in a savings account and you'll be fine. That doesn't work for us anymore, but it did work for our parents. But trust no one. Listen to their advice, independently verify. Honestly, if you're here on Planning Fire, that's a great first step. You have my advice, but hey, make sure you do research on me as well. I could be crazy. But in reality, if you have a great opportunity come in or an excellent multi-level marketing scheme, do your own research and make sure it makes sense. Just because Pat Sajak told you on TV, dated myself, but just because he told you that doesn't mean it's a great investment opportunity. You probably don't need the life insurance he's offering you unless you think you do. But if you know your own research, make sure you're doing it. Don't skimp out on that. It's too important to mess up. Now, of course, there is a case for cowardice, and that's going to be depending on your own financial circumstance. Before you start getting into the market or into investments, you need to ask yourself 3 very important questions. How much can I afford to buy? If you go to buy something, the less times you have to buy it, the better. So if you can go and make a more aggressive upfront investment, you're going to save on commission costs and brokerage fees. You're going to save on initial purchasing opportunity costs. It just drives down that price. If you end up buying, say, 10 shares of a stock 100 times, that's going to really eat you in commission fees. But if you buy that many shares once, you're going to save a ton. So how much can I buy? Now, the next one is how long can I wait for the return, especially if you're not going to be in the market. When you're looking at different treasuries and bonds, the longer the term, the better the rate you tend to get. So if you don't need to touch it, figure out how long you can avoid touching it for. Is it 5 years, 2 years, 10 years, 30 years? And then from there, you can make better investment decisions. And lastly, of course, how much risk can I tolerate? Depending on your circumstances, there used to be a rule of thumb that I'm not going to lay out here because in my opinion, it's dated. But how much risk can I tolerate? Me personally, I'm married, no kids, so our risk tolerance is going to be a lot higher than, say, someone who has 2 children or someone who's on a single income. That said, you need to assess your own level of risk. You can't have anyone tell you what your level of risk is. Now, of course, if you have a broker, you have a financier, and they've signed a fiduciary clause, meaning they're only out for your best interest, perhaps you can listen to their advice, but make sure you do your own research, tie it all back together, and make the choice that's best for you and your family. So if you're not going to get into the market, I'm just going to touch on these really quickly because quite frankly, index funds and stock, probably where your money's going to end up going unless you're very financially risk adverse. So if you're going to do these things and you're not going to be in the market, short-term investments, probably going to be a money market because it's liquid, just like a checking account, not FDIC insured, but you can get your money and you can make a decent savings on it. Or perhaps you purchase treasury bills. Probably the safest investment there is because it's government backed and you can get your return tax free, which is really nice as well. If you have a longer term, say anything over 2 to 5 years, you may look into bonds. You could look into treasury notes if you're going 2 to 10 years, or treasury bonds, which are greater than 10. I'm not going to really touch on what these individual things are. I just wanted to bring them to your awareness. There's a little bit more detail down in the article below, but in reality, look at your investment options, make the best decision for you. So there's actually a ton of bonds and a ton of bond options. I left them all down below in the article. You can take a look. I'm treating it more like an appendix. I'm mostly doing that because that's not a style of investing I'm into. Right now, I have fairly high risk tolerance. I'm a young guy, no dependents, and so a lot of my money's in indexes. I don't normally individually pick stocks. I have some real estate, but I tend to go for higher risk investments. If you want to look at your different bond options, look below. Just know that a lot of those things you may or may not want to invest in, but do your own research. And that's where I'm going to call it this time on part 2. You can survive on $165,000 a year. The only investment book you'll ever need, it's a good read. There's a lot of things that I didn't pick up from other investment books, like The Millionaire Next Door, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, because it's a different style. It's more legacy investing. It's still a good read, helps me understand a lot of those terms, and I can't wait to get back and get to the next section with you guys. Are you guys reading this with me? Do you have any questions? I'd love to field some questions. I'd love to get a good discussion started. But until next time, I'm Sean from planningfire.com. I hope you enjoy this book as much as I do, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.